to conform to the idea that in order for Jewish or Israeli students to feel comfortable in their school in their school spaces, Palestinian experiences must be censored. And the WRDSB really needs to understand that Zionism and the Israeli government do not equate to Judaism at all. They are completely distinct. And by minimizing Palestinian existence as solely a threat or as anti Semitic, the board not only dehumanizes its students, but it strips students of their humanity and cultural identity. Jewish allies have also expressed time and time again that by connecting the religion of Judaism to the genocidal acts of Israel, that in itself is anti Semitic. And both of these things really contradict with the school board's core values of diversity, inclusion, and their effort to protect students' mental health and well being. So, why aren't really these efforts to create safe spaces and protecting that well being of students extended to the significant student body of Arabs, Palestinians, and allies and Muslims as well? There isn't really an answer to that, which spurs our responsibility as community members to help support students in making that change. Regardless of our connections to the school board or lack of, it is a duty to work on creating supportive and safe spaces for students both outside and within our schools. Something that resonates with me, and I really want everyone to pay attention to this. It's a quote by an educator, Diana Richler, and she said, "Inclusion is not a strategy to help people fit into the systems and structures which exist in our societies. It is about transforming those systems and structures to make it better for everyone." Building a supportive system for youth fosters safety. It encourages students to step into leadership roles and actively and openly advocate for Palestinian rights. Unfortunately, many schools across Canada focus on getting Arab students to assimilate to the values of their school boards, pushing them to suppress their identities. And as a community, our goal really needs to be to dismantle the idea of coerced conformity and create spaces where students can openly express their identities and practice their right of self determination. As a student myself, I feel it's crucial to be part of these support systems for younger students who, like me, wish they had them early on. And that student mobilization really catalyzes important conversations that address the root issues within our school board and within our community. So it's really our responsibility to leave our schools better for those who come after us. And when young people see their peers taking action and encouraging others to challenge those established systems, they want to join in, whether that be at the elementary level, the high school level, or even in our universities. And that support network grows, which encourages the expression of Arab identity and strengthens our students to take control of their own narrative.
To help students take care of their narrative and take control of their narrative, Sporas created the Student Ambassador Program. The Student Ambassador Program provides resources and support to student advocates to lead events that commemorate and or celebrate Palestinian heritage. With the Student Ambassador Program, we work to ensure that every student feels valued, heard, and safe when expressing who they are. When I started high school, I was a very motivated individual who had the intention of creating a safe space of Palestinian and allied students by providing them opportunities of Palestinian representation that we didn't really get to see a lot. To be expected, this motivation came with a lot of backlash, not only from administration, but from my peers as well. And I didn't have the proper tools to facilitate those conversations or the support to advocate and hold particular events. At this time last year, myself, along with multiple Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim students, were going through a very hard time of grieving. It was a very isolating and villainizing experience, and we had to deal with a lot of sorrow and guilt that we didn't know where to place. And when I had attempted to do anything, it resulted in being called down to the office, being sent home, mistreated by my peers and administration, and more. Just more and more punishments. That is when Student Ambassadors was introduced. It not only gave me, myself, and my peers the opportunity and resources to educate ourselves, our peers, teachers, and administration, but it gave us a platform and direction to channel all of those emotions, all of that grief and guilt, but with a purpose. It helps us grow and be proactive, engaging citizens, which we undoubtedly need more of. Some of the events student ambassadors have planned include tabling for significant days like November 29th, which is the UN International Day of Palestinian Solidarity, Land Day, and Nakba, and hosting vigils, protests, sit-ins, and more. Joining student ambassadors creates a space for isolated students to come together and empower themselves, not only in the educational setting, but in regard to advocating for Palestine, but empowers us to grow into the strong people we have the potential to become. By joining student ambassadors, students have the opportunity to have conversations with everyone around them, preparing them for futures endeavors like university or college or whatever workspace they can become a part of in the future. What they learn from student ambassadors will help them learn how to use their voice, utilize empowering language, how to have productive conversations, and more. Having student ambassadors in our school cause a ripple effect of impacting every single person in our environment. When we educate one person, that is passed down. When we educate a teacher or administrator, they learn to adapt and understand Palestinian students in a multitude of ways. For instance, on November 29th, the UN recognized Day of International Palestinian Solidarity. After our tabling event, my English teacher had dedicated a period of time in the beginning of class to share what that day is, what it means, and a brief section of Palestinian history, and gave her students a moment to do their own research, have their own conversations with the people around them, to learn more about the significant day and Palestinian struggle and history. Or when I was in grade 10 and having conversations with administrators about Palestinian history and struggle, more specifically about Al Nakba, which is when 750,000 Palestinians were displaced, uh, forcefully displaced out of their homes by Israeli and British forces. When having these conversations, I noticed that words like celebrated and conflict were being used to describe a Nakba, words that enforce Palestinian erasure and censorship. I corrected them and gave them the other words that they could use, like commemorating and ethnic cleansing, which they then began to shift their choice of language. We students created opportunities and demanded our voices to be heard. This is the change we need to continue to not only in our schools, but in all of our spaces that we currently occupy.
As a community, we need to come together and support our students. Every single taxpayer has a say in how our schools are run, even when our teachers' pensions are being invested. So here are our goals within student advocacy.
So some of those long-term goals include demanding the implementation of training for teachers to learn what Palestinian solidarity and sympathy looks like, whether that looks like PD Day training, workshops teachers sign up for themselves in order to affirm Palestinian identity and mediate conversations in regard to Palestine in the classroom. These training workshops are crucial and extremely important to help guide these teachers to make a more safe and inclusive space for Palestinian and allied students. Secondly, schools must encourage progressive, mediated, and I want to stress mediated conversation. When students are called down to the office for their student advocacy, a lot of the time they are caught off guard and they don't have that support system. So that's a very draining and mentally challenging position to be in. So having that support and having that mediation is extremely crucial to a student's growth. So whether that mediation, whether that support system comes from a parent or a teacher or a guidance counselor, it is extremely important. Thirdly, combating anti-Palestinian racism and censorship of words like genocidal regime, apartheid, occupation, or equating anti-Semitism with the criticism of the state of Israel. This censorship just pushes the erasure and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians even more, and it really dilutes what we are trying to do as student advocates, especially when we are talking about our own government and how their role plays into Israel's occupation and apartheid. to create spaces in schools where advocacy is not harmful to a student's record or intimidating. So when a student is called down to the office, a lot of the time, um, administrators will leave them in the office by themselves and just until they get their meeting started. And that is, I would say, some sort of an intimidation tactic that some administrators use to kind of scare students. And they start thinking of how this can go on their record, how this will permanently affect them, how this can affect them into going into university or college or whatever workspace they want to go into, how their student, how their peers, how their teachers, how administrators themselves will start to think of them. All of these are very, very harmful to a student, not only mental health, but record.
So now that we talked about kind of our long-term goals as students, what can the community do to kind of support these students and what community response should look like? One of the first things is filling out petitions that support student advocacy and protect allied teachers. Sporas has advertised many petitions, has recently created one, so you can look over there to find some. But unfortunately, with our schools, in our school board, there isn't really like a belief system or moral high ground. Basically, anything that's put in place is because of pressure from the community. And the schools push the ideas and the beliefs of people that are pressuring them into doing it. And so, by showing our beliefs as a community and standing behind those students and supporting that advocacy and supporting allied teachers who might also get in trouble for their support is really, really important because that's the only way that we'll get the school board or administration to really do anything about it and protect the students. And without showing that support, then they keep treating the students unjustly. And it's really long term and short term harms students in advocacy. Teaching and encouraging your kids when I say kids, not necessarily it doesn't have to be necessarily your kids, but nieces and nephews, younger siblings, or even just youth that are around you, teaching them the importance of advocacy. Um, Something that, like made me and Jenna confident enough to get into advocacy work this young and to kind of do the work knowing that there are consequences because of the systems that are put in place in our schools is because we were taught so young about advocacy through experience. Um, we went to the protests. Our parents didn't really censor what was going on around the world, and we were taught to embrace learning rather than making it seem like having these conversations were a bad thing or a scary thing. And I think even with other student ambassadors, we all kind of have that in common. And really, if you don't teach your kids young, like what advocacy is and what to do in activism, it's really rare that they're going to grow up and decide, oh, yeah, let me go into activism. Um, and essentially just making sure that Palestine doesn't die. And I think it's our job to make sure that the young don't forget. And we are doing that. And so, as a community, making sure that even not kids, even um, your friends, or if you're a boss, employees, just the people around you, and making sure that the idea of Palestine lives through everyone around you. It's your job to do advocacy yourself, but also to share that advocacy with other people. Sign petition for school boards and unions to divest teacher pensions from weapon and manufacturing companies. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to Educators for Palestine, and they kind of go more in depth into that. Another thing is backing students as a community when they're treated unjustly. I kind of touched on this about how the school board or even just administrators in general don't really create change unless they feel pressured to. And so things like when Jenna was talking about how students will get sent down to the office and they're kind of have get really intimidated by administrators, or being sent home, or having things put on your record, and it kind of creates this fear in students because obviously university and graduating is such like a big deal for us. Um, have like backing them when those things are happening and calling the administrators, emailing the school board, emailing the superintendent. We've had multiple meetings with the school board about policy and about progressive language and conversations that need to happen. And think to yourself, are you being involved in those? Are you backing the students in those conversations and creating that support system for them to fall back on when sometimes they need to. Um, so yeah, that's super important. And then another thing that I really wanted to touch on was student-led events. We've had multiple, more than multiple, really, student-led events, rallies, encampments, teach-ins, um, like showing up, and even things like walkouts, being there as a marshal, for example, for safety, or even asking students, what can I do to help you? Having that support. I know that for me and Jenna, as student activists, has really helped us with different events that we've run. And even like being a mentor to younger students to show them kind of what activism can look like and things that you like through your own experience helping the students. On the university level, the encampments, obviously the encampments aren't running now, but like what have you done for the encampment? Have you visited the encampment? Even things like providing the food and the furniture, and just fostering that space where they're able to grow as activists, and really making it as easy as possible for them as a community for students. Um, and then last but not least is calling your MPs and MPPs and trustees. That's obviously why we're all here today. When our government changes its stance, then our schools also change their stance. And the language used by the ICC or the government is what helps kind of stop that censorship, because those words are now like considered allowed to use in our schools. And so by changing their stance in the government, it automatically changes the ideas that are being reiterated by the schools, when it comes to advocating in those spaces. So, yeah, that's basically it. But thank you.
Thank you so much for coming here and speaking to us today. That's truly inspirational. I remember, I think it was about earlier this year, I had the pleasure of listening to Jannah talk at the Waterloo Public Square, I believe it was. And it's so nice that both of you have kept going with your activism. And I really appreciated like talking to us and all of us here about what we can do to help support you in your advocacy and also in our daily life, which is super important. And also, thanks for setting up that wonderful segue into what we're doing today.
Thank you so much for having us.